We're going to have you sit right in the middle.
All right.
Good, thank you.
Thanks again for doing this.
My pleasure. Real quickly, I know we only we have a limited amount of time. These are three of our publications. I'm Black engineer, Hispanic engineer, women of color, and this will be of particular interest to you becoming an engineer. We arm professionals throughout the United States. When they go into a classroom and they talk to young people, the first question is, what is engineering? And a lot of people can't explain it. So we break it down for them. We show them a real live role model, what engineering is about, and the thing the kids care about.
That's great.
But I'm leaving this to you so you can do that.
I'm glad you shared that. You know, this we should share that with the Bowman Creek folks back home. So in Sharon's district, there's a partnership going on where we got the community. Well, you can explain this.
Nope, I got you. I got your back.
Okay. Did you mention Boeing?
No, it's called Bowman Creek because it all started with the basically daylighting an environmentally impaired underground river called Bowman Creek in a very stressed neighborhood in South Bend. But they brought together the University of Notre Dame, but also the local community college, the high school, the campus of Indiana University that's there, and the neighbors, all working on everything from water quality improvement to neighborhood empowerment. So a lot of it's about the neighborhood work, but a lot of it is about bringing engineering, mostly environmental engineering, but not only that.
That's one of the careers.
Kind of connecting it in so that the high school students can start to get their arms around what it needs. And you'll see these kids working, especially in the summers, they get internships, working on their programming little Arduinos to do, I don't even understand what they're doing, but it's propels them onto this path. So it's really exciting stuff.
So a couple of things. We're going to run these articles in a number of the publications. So that's why we're videotaping this piece. And we're going to have a digital distribution.
Great.
So I just want to go back to something that's really important, which are the historically black colleges and universities that you talked about, and the role, the significant role that they play. We represent roughly 16 ABET accredited engineering programs that graduate 33% and 30% of engineers in computer science. There's over 300 plus accredited engineering programs. But when you look at the resources that are put into the HBCUs, it is less than 2% of our national federal budget. How do you see truly these historically black institutions and minority serving institutions, and what is your plan with the Douglas plan in really addressing building infrastructure? Now, Mayor Pete, I want to be clear with this question. Not simply giving them money.
Yes.
Okay? Even though the dollars have been cut significantly under the last couple of administrations, I'm talking about building significant infrastructure.
So historically black colleges and universities play the critical role in cultivating the next generation of black professionals. And especially when we think about areas like engineering, like tech, medicine, and others where we need to correct that gap. There's no way to solve that problem without turning to the HBCUs that have demonstrated just how good they are at addressing this. So part of the Douglas plan is a proposal to set aside $50 billion in federal support directly for HBCUs and minority serving institutions. And while we want to keep some flexibility in the design of that funding, the number one goal that I would assign to that funding is this question of how do we help people get pathways into these career fields where maybe they've never seen somebody who looks like them in some of these careers. Part of that is about making sure the infrastructure is there, that the resources are there on campus. Part of it's about the relationship with employers, making sure that anybody contemplating these fields knows that there is opportunity waiting for them on the other end of it in terms of a likely job offer if they do everything that's expected of them. Part of it's completion, making sure we support college completion, knowing all of the barriers for, in particular, first-generation students who, it's not just about affordability, no question we got to deal with that, but also making sure they get the resources to ensure they graduate, because the biggest problems for folks with student debt usually happen when they fall short of graduation but still carry that debt. And so part of it's investing in physical plant, a lot of it's investing in people. And that's where I think we'll get the biggest payoff on these funds.
Well, when I talk about infrastructure, I know in the Covenant with Black America, which was the New York Times #1 bestseller, and I wrote the chapter on technology. What I recommended, and my list of recommendations was that we create a federal research center built around the HBCUs. That would be similar to what MITRE has done, applied physics labs, and guarantee in a certain area the HBCUs could collaborate and that federal dollars would always exist. That means that you're able to do PhDs, you're able to do more research, you're able to hire faculty. What do you think of something like that? I know you haven't had a chance. I'm throwing it.
No, but having seen what MITRE can do,
which is an incredible company,
it's extraordinary. Yeah, so
their CEO is a good friend.
Oh, yeah, that's good to know. So,
Yeah, Jason.
so I think it's a really smart approach, because what you're doing then is a lot of dollars that are programmed anyway in order to support research, but could be programmed in a way that meets our other goals too.
That's right.
I mean, we've seen just from how some of the universities in my own backyard chase these grant dollars, and when it goes well, it's community economic development, as well as building up the university, building up the next generation of researchers, supporting faculty, and supporting that end goal of what the research is actually for. So I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but I'm glad you raised it, because it's a great example of how we can bring purpose to that funding.
Well, I just left the board of Morgan State after 6 years, and prior to that I was on the board of a predominantly white college. So I see the equity of dollars that were actually coming in. One of the challenges that the universities have had, particularly HBCUs and particularly at Morgan State, is winning federal dollars. This research piece would help take a little bit of pressure off of those different departments where the funding from Department of Education can go up and drop depending on who the secretary happens to be. So my next question, I want to spend a lot of time on it because I have two more for you. But my next question really would be, how would we guarantee that the federal agencies live up to a certain part of their budget going to the HBCUs? And many of them are not hitting those goals.
So a separate part of the Douglas plan is about federal purchasing and proposing a 25% target on making sure that taxpayer dollars are spent in a way that reflects the diversity of the taxpayers themselves. I think it makes a lot of sense for us to apply that same thinking when we're looking at the research side. After all, in a way, it is federal purchasing. It's not maybe the same kind of procurement you always think about.
And it's infrastructure building.
Yes.
Because if you have those professors, kids want to go where the smartest faculty members are who care and will help them get out the door.
That's right. Yeah. So I think that alignment is very natural.
Let's talk about the digital divide, because what I said out there was that we have a challenge in rural communities, but we have a major challenge in the urban communities.
Yeah.
Because that infrastructure doesn't exist in many of those areas, and tech people aren't going to go where there's no technology infrastructure. I want you to talk about how you would approach the digital opportunities or digital divide without simply talking about access. Because a kid has Microsoft doesn't mean that they know how to program.
Yes.
Because a kid can drive a car doesn't mean that they're an engineer. So having access without having the right curriculum and the right opportunities really just turns them into what I call technical consumers. Because I have a cell phone doesn't mean I know how to program.
That's right.
So let's address what we can do in building opportunity for businesses by expanding the digital opportunities, and secondly, what we can do on the educational side to make sure that technology has real meaning to a future in which people can really increase their livelihood.
I think the fundamental question is who benefits from a piece of technology. And sometimes the user is the beneficiary, but sometimes that's not the case.
That's right.
Sometimes the beneficiary is whoever's selling it. Sometimes the beneficiary is in a whole different place than the user of the technology. And we've got to make sure all of these things line up in a way that benefits those who get access. Access is still important, because if you don't have that, then none of the rest of it works. It's kind of multiplied by zero. So we do think there's a lot of role. One of the things we're noticing, for example, in a pretty diverse and largely low-income community that I serve right now, is sometimes kids will have smartphones, but they won't have a data plan. And so that's where publicly available Wi-Fi, for example, or extending Wi-Fi into public housing and parks facilities and neighborhood centers is so important. But I take the point that access is just the beginning. And so we've also got to make sure that how are we using it? It's the same thing with making sure that kids get tablets or laptops at school. That's fine, but it's not enough. It doesn't really solve the question of whether there's a meaningful educational benefit. And that's where curriculum needs to be empowering for young people to understand how their relationship with technology could help them, whether it's as entrepreneurs, as employees, or just as citizens. And we've got to make sure that empowerment is at the heart of the kinds of guidance that a well-balanced Department of Education could be offering to communities and school districts that maybe have never been set up to do this, or if they do get any help, it's getting devices, but maybe not so much ensuring that those devices are used in a way that actually makes the kids better off.
You talked a little bit about venture capital, and
Yes.
we all know that the reason a company will go into an area is because of talent, property value, and access to capital. So when we look at the minority community, we see less than 10% of those companies in the tech area. So with your plan, what are you thinking about? How do you fundamentally change that?
Well, it takes intention. That's part of why the procurement goals are so important. But it's also why we got to reform access to credit. One of the things I'm proposing is that we add the capital that goes into community development financial institutions, CDFIs, that have a much better track record than commercial banking in general of supporting minority entrepreneurs, but don't always get the flows of capital they should. They're very successful when they get the chance. So I would increase the CRA credits that go for funding these CDFIs. Another thing that I think is really important is being willing to directly co-invest. We've seen this in Maryland with the TEDCO model, where that kind of co-investment really unlocks companies that have the potential to generate great returns but never get to scale. And I think we should be willing to do the same thing with federal dollars, and when we do, we can unlock billions more for these entrepreneurs that we've got to support if we ever want to get over these hurdles. I guess the bottom line is that just saying that we've dismantled old discriminatory structures and say that everything's neutral now is not going to be enough to overcome disparities that compound if they're left on their own, in the same way that wealth compounds left on its own.
This may be a touchy one, but I have to say this. In working over 40 years in this area with all of the major companies, the military, strong supporters of what we do, I still come across countless companies that will not hire and do not hire for whatever reasons. They won't, and these are major companies. So my question would be, how would we encourage those companies getting federal grants, getting federal dollars to really go out and try to make some hiring goals?
Well, I think part of what we've got to do is we've got to not only ensure that obviously there is no tolerance for discrimination or intentional disparity in hiring, but also when the response is, hey, we tried, we just couldn't find them, right? We didn't get the applications, or whatever the kind of root problem is, that we ask those businesses to accept responsibility for making sure that they are cultivating more people who can apply. So in the same way that one of the struggles for public purchasing with MBEs is availability, but we ought to have some responsibility for growing the availability and the capacity. Same thing with human capital and talent, that if the availability isn't there, grow it and accept a responsibility for cultivating people. And then when there is apples to apples discrimination, we need to be able to enforce on that. And while it's on the books that you can't do it, we don't have the enforcement resources we really need, and I would prioritize those companies that are benefiting from federal dollars it's not hard. You send out some resumes, you can find out pretty quick where these patterns are, and they're there.
Great.
So we can act on that.
And thank you. And I'll tell you, some of the great ones are Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing. Those kind of companies really are very supportive. I know we're out of time.
Tyrone.
Okay, I know. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Same here. Appreciate it.
And I'm
Thanks for
going
your
to leave
work.
this with you.
Great.
Thank you so
We'll
much.
take that back with us.
Anything we can do. Okay?
Wonderful.
Thank you. I'm sorry, did you get a chance to get?
I know, it's a great thing to do, work with, I'm managing for.
Oh, fantastic. Great. Thanks for your work.
Thank you so much. Thank
If you want access to either one of them for.
That's about time.
They're available to go on the record.
Yeah, right.
You can make that happen.
We will, of course.
And are who you should talk to.
I'll take it with mine. Yours.
No, we're
Thank you, sir.
We needed the, any phones.
Okay, we will get everybody. Get everybody mine.
Yes.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
This guy's a Marine.
Oh, great.
He's a former.
Oh, thanks for joining today.
He's a Marine forever, he says. We don't hold it against him.
Thank you so much. Pleasure meeting you, man.
Thanks very much. Same here. Thanks again. See you on the train.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate you taking the time.
I think we're gonna